and wonderful to have you back. There have been a lot of changes in the industry, and I think if you want to kick off with a short video and some opening remarks, I think that is a fantastic introduction to how the year has gone and what your outlook is. Thereafter, we'll throw it up for Q&A. There are two mechanisms for putting questions forward to Rain. The first is to stick up your hand with the hand icon on the top, and the second is to just enter a question into the chat, and I'll be monitoring both. Brandon, wonderful to have you here, and over to you.
Great, thanks everybody. For those who haven't met in the little bubbles, hello every little bubble. It's still very disappointing for me to present to a screen, so I'll certainly try my best. And it's just a short introduction to Rain. I'm going to just highlight some of the major things that happened over the year for us and probably the industry. And then what I'll do from there is just any questions are welcome, and hopefully I can answer them to you guys' satisfaction. Okay, so meet Rain again. For those of you we have met before, welcome back. For those who don't, well, hello, I'm Brandon from Rain, as we said, and here's just a short video. Hopefully it plays well on your side, and just to try and give you a bit of sense of who we are.
Unbox the whole internet. Unlimited fast home Wi-Fi that works out the box.
Yeah, so hopefully that quickly gives you a bit of a snapshot of the last statement is probably the most pertinent. We learned a lot, but we still know we don't know. This is probably the quick snapshot of our business perspective. You know, from everyone would be familiar that the Spectrum auction has now happened. It's been a long time going, lots of court cases. The industry is very alive and well. I think I said that last year as well, but it still is. Positive growth in the industry. I think people understanding the internet is not going to go away. From a customer standpoint, our 5G business and a lot of things we're talking about now is 5G. Continue to grow well. Customers are satisfied, and a lot of customers migrate from 4G to 5G. We're super aware of headwinds from competition. We're not naive of that. So we're going to really still focus hard on maintaining our position, leading in 5G. Our brand and customer services continue to improve, and we're getting better and starting to resonate a lot more. Product standpoint, you know, we still have two primary product groups, 4G for phones and any device, and 5G for homes at different price points based on different experiences. This year we'll enter the SME market, which is quite exciting for us, a new market we haven't touched yet. There's still a lot of learning to do. We also, through that, will be building new channels and partnerships that make sense with obviously these new product portfolios. A key area, we're expanding the offering itself, and also payment methods. Today we're all online, and we're looking into different ways to kind of increase our portfolio of customers that can access Rain. On the network side, we've delivered on our rollout targets. We currently have about 70% population coverage with 4G and over 6 million homes covered with 5G. Now new spectrum, which is quite a key thing, is spectrum auction has happened, and we've now got access to additional spectrum to help us expand. The key thing, which I'm going to touch on a little bit in a couple of slides further, the key thing about having a balanced spectrum portfolio has allowed us to start enabling these services in a much more cost-effective way. That's probably the snapshot view of what's happening. From brand awareness, maybe my brain, our focus is still been really getting our brand out there. Our competitors have been around forever, extremely powerful competitors, and we're really not naive of that. But we've really worked hard in getting our brand reputation up, and we've grown 100%, 170% improvement year on year. Our customer experience is getting better, and even these ISP rankings on quarter, we're growing in the right direction. We've launched in lots of small towns around the country, and getting much more hyper-local in some of our executions. But I think let's talk about the big thing that happened over the last 12 months is spectrum. And I think last time we did discuss spectrum to a degree, so we thought it would make you a really interesting picture. That's a building with giant windows, and hopefully that antenna is not quite as big as that. But just to understand, that spectrum is not equal. If you look at spectrum, you get different flavors, like a better word. Spectrum that goes short distances but high capacity, and spectrum that goes long distances but low capacity. So as a telco, as an operator, you need to have a combination of these. And just to give you a sense, hopefully you can all remember pi r squared from school, but it's r squared. So the gain in coverage of the radius is significant. So if you take it's our 3.6 network has been the smallest coverage, you've got to multiply by the square. So on something like 700 megahertz, it's 14 times the coverage that you'd get on 3.6. And if you take the current telcos who've rolled out 900 megahertz, our coverage is almost 6 times bigger than that. So that's hugely exciting for us to start. South Africa is a very big place, and to put coverage across everywhere for everyone to be able to access our services, you need to have a cost-effective method of doing that. And to do that, you need to have less base stations. I mean, fundamentally, a big part of telecoms is effectively site rentals. So, the more base stations you have, the higher your OpEx. If you can have spectrum that goes further, you need less base stations, and you can have a more cost-effective network. As Rain, we're very lucky or fortunate. I don't know if lucky is the right word, but apparently the more you practice, the luckier you get. So we are lucky fortunate that we have now got 700 megahertz. And we don't actually have a big legacy installed network. So we can cherry pick a little bit more how we deploy coverage and that spectrum band, and how to deploy capacity network. So today our 4G network runs primarily on our 1800 2.6 network over here. And as you can see, that coverage is going to jump significantly as we move forward. To give you a bit of a sense, how does the spectrum portfolios look like after the auction? And everybody will know spectrum is certainly a lifeblood of our industry. Today, as we try to explain the difference in spectrum, let me just try to give you a quick overview. You get in purple what we call sub 1. This is spectrum that goes far. Mid-band FDD spectrum is pretty much used for phones and let's say, capacity networks. And then 5G, you need mid-band TDD spectrum. So this TDD spectrum is the kind of, let's say, the golden spectrum bands for 5G, and you can see we're very well positioned in the 5G ecosystem against our major competitors. In the sub 1 area, our competitors like MTN and Vodacom have got double the sub 1 capacity. However, they've also got to run 2G and 3G in their network. So we still think we've got a bit of an opportunity to deploy this without having to do 2G and 3G and make our network architecture far more efficient. As you look at the other operators, Liquid, which does not offer consumer services, but we put them in there for completeness, and Cell C, as you're aware, no longer runs the network component. MTN does, and their spectrum portfolio did not change much after the spectrum auction. So in effect, what do we feel this year? We're well positioned to unlock the opportunities of homes and phones, and this acronym 4IR, Fourth Industrial Revolution applications. We're not sure what all those mean, but we're certainly close to it and preparing our thinking and building our network to support it. But 2022 for us this year will be quite a big transitional year to prepare Rain for a bit more future growth and taking on these new opportunities. And although that's probably my quick summary, and then we can jump into questions. So I think that'll be thanks, Kevin.
Wonderful. The floor is now open. Brandon, let me start off. The spectrum that you acquired, really two questions. First of all, how do you pay for it? Is this just an upfront cost of 1.2 billion, or is this something that's amortized over a number of years? And the second one is, if you do it in equivalents, how many base stations would that be the equivalent of having to build?
Okay, let me jump. First, spectrum, the way the auction, huge credit to South African CASA and regulator. They did a brilliant job. It was run really well done. Effectively, what happens is we've already paid our spectrum license fee. Your license fees is CapEx. You have to pay the kind of, let's say, to get in the game. And once you get in the game, you can then, let me actually just stop presenting it a bit better. So you pay that in a CapEx model, and then you annualize OpEx is based on the types of spectrum. So your big check is pay up front, gives you access to the spectrum for 20 years. In general, globally, these renewals are pretty much dealt with in the future. So I can't tell you what happens in 20 years' time, but it's certainly no one loses access to the spectrum. It is probably an opportunity for government to raise a bit more money, subject to how well it's going. In terms of network, basically, you got to think about South Africa. It's putting up, let's say, street pole lights everywhere. If you have a very bright light that you could put very high, you need less lights. So what 700 allows us to do is, rough math, approximately a third or so of what's needed compared to the monsters, if I can call them that. I shouldn't be calling my competitors monsters, but in terms of really big organizations that are effective what they're doing. MTN Vodacom have about 12,000 odd sites around the country. We still got a lot to go. We're about probably on 4G, just over 7,500 odd. So to get coverage, we'll deploy on 700 now, and we would be able to not need to get to 12,000. We'll probably, then really get a huge benefit of 700. The other thing, keep in mind there, just for reference, is the other operators also got spectrum, and we're not naive of that, so we're very comfortable with that. Telkom got 800, which they can start deploying. MTN as well. And I think MTN and Vodacom will continue to be the leaders in our market, and I don't think that's going to change overnight. But for us, we're not really focused too much on our competitors' actions. We're far more focused on our consumers, our customers. And this just allows us to reach our customers at a much more cost-effective base. So, Kevin, I suppose it's less, probably in the tune of a third over the period, but maybe a third to half of the number of sites required.
Yeah, fabulous. And we have our first question from the floor. Myron, please unmute and go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. I suppose my first question is, you've started off with a post-paid model, monthly subscriptions, if you like. Why was that, and how far are you from sort of looking at the prepaid model now?
Yeah, good question. Well, quite interestingly enough, we were, when we launched, we 100% online. That's still an advantage we feel and had to us, but it has some disadvantages. And when you're 100% online, prepaid vouchers and such like, wasn't, it's not something that we anticipated at the time. We are currently preparing for prepaid offerings. We have got the functionality. We just need to make sure that, we're trying our best to make sure that that is something that consumers need. And we think in South African market, absolutely, prepaid is a huge part of the market. And I think that we will offer prepaid services. The challenge is in South African landscape today, prepaid is actually more expensive than postpaid. And, it's almost like a fundamental question to us. So, we haven't really right now, I can tell you honestly, is that, the way we determine our tariffs is until the last hour before we launch them. We make sure we debate to death, but we will offer some form of prepaid to reach more customers. And I think with the economy where it's at and the pain that consumers are going to experience, I think we're not naive that that price points are extremely sensitive in South African landscape. However, in the two product lines, the phone and home, one thing that we found in the home market, home is effective reducing the cost of communication because that's now a shared service. So what happens in a household where people have 3 prepaid SIMs at 100 Rand a gig, now getting, let's say, Rain 5G for home, and they're sharing that expense. So in a sense, home internet is actually almost offsetting this economic challenges that the world's under. But prepaid, short answer is yes. How we going to do it? 100%, not 100% sure yet. We will get closer to it.
Thanks. I'll go back in the queue. Thank you.
Next we have Willem. Willem, please unmute and go ahead.
Morning. Thanks, guys. Brandon, did I get your comments correctly that you don't think this 5G auction really changed the landscape in the telco space in South Africa dramatically? So just to confirm that, or your views on that. And then also pricing for the spectrum, was it more or less in line with what you expected, or how did that, where did that land relative to your guys' expectations? Thanks.
Sure. I mean, I think the comment that I'm saying around the market not changing fundamentally, I think we have to realize that MTN and Vodacom specifically are extremely good at what they do. So to unlodge the first and the second competitors is not an easy task. From our point of view, we do believe that the market is significant enough for us to build a great business without having to take those guys head on. And spectrum allows us to do that. But if you think about how does the spectrum work, effectively the number 1 and number 2 just both got faster. So everyone kind of the race, everyone got quicker. So the ability to have spectrum, because everyone kind of moved forward, the kind of pole positions didn't really change that much. I do think that one thing you could argue is, in terms of our other competitors, Telkom and Cell C, maybe Cell C is quite probably the most in a very, very different position to everybody else. They've taken that strategic decision, and I think Doug's decisions, is probably the right one for him. But that does change the landscape a lot for them. Spectrum does allow you to have your cost production lowered. So the more spectrum you have, the lower your cost of production is. So that, I think, for them is something they'll have to figure out with MTN. And in Telkom's case, they've always, interesting enough, they've always had a lot of spectrum. So I don't think it's going to fundamentally change theirs. The big thing that changes for Telkom and Rain is we got sub-1 access, which is Telkom's fight and our fight over the last 2 years was to get access to sub-1, and that allows us to get coverage. What you will probably see is roaming deals, change over time because it's not as needed. So that's the big thing that you get. If you took at the price points, look, we got a really good deal, if I could put it that way. Vodacom and MTN ended up paying just over 5 billion. We spent just over 1.4 billion. But we got our first stab of spectrum at a discount, and because the regulator created a pro-competitive environment that the small operators could kind of bid without the big guys being there. So Telkom and us got a really good, got a good price point, and we probably, in terms of the exact same spectrum, we saved just under 2 billion versus what MTN and Vodacom. So I suppose I can't complain, and that's on that basis.
Right. We have a question on the chat from AJ. What is your view on FTTH market in South Africa, seeing as there's been some recent M&A, and given that Rain 5G fixed wireless offering is competing against fiber as much as against Vodacom, Telkom, MTN fixed wireless offerings?
Yeah, it's a question we get asked quite a lot. I think in the fiber market, it's completely rational that you'll see market consolidation. Any network it's a scale business. Telecoms is a scale industry, so market consolidation is completely expected. From our point of view, there's nothing stopping us to get into the FTTH market if we felt that our economic engine made better sense there. Fundamentally for us, our economics make better sense in 5G. Keep in mind that the FTTH providers do not have spectrum. They don't have the same elements that we have. So we feel we're competing very well against FTTH. And maybe just to give you a bit of insight, if you look in the US now, you see T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon. all of them are starting to launch 5G home internet in a very established internet market. So we feel that the economics of putting up one base station to serve a small community is far more economically rational than digging up a trench into every single person's house. It's just, I think it's a civil engineering project. It's not a technology project. Whether you're putting in plastic in the ground or water pipes, that's quite a complex thing. So if you could get electricity through the air, would you prefer it through the air or through cables? So in a weird way, we kind of look at FTTH as absolutely a competitor. We sell very, very well where there's FTTH providers today. From a market growth standpoint, the home internet industry, we grow faster than the market. So if the market is growing at X%, we're growing quicker than the actual market. So I think the FTTH guys, I think consolidation makes sense for them. Ultimately, the amount of money you have to invest to get your ROI out. So from our point of view, it's purely an ROI-based thinking. It's just economically better to deploy one massive street light than to put us light into everybody's house. It's just economically more profitable. And secondly, your reach is so much bigger. For us to roll out in a small town, we can put 3 or 4 base stations up and we up. But if you take a town where your houses are far away, for fiber, it's actually pretty cost ineffective. And it's no different to, I suppose, the sad thing about in South Africa context is, potholes in the road. Building roads is expensive, and fiber is like a plastic road. It's much easier to do it over there. But if we one day feel that FTTH is a market that we feel is, let's say, gaining too much traction from the consumers, if they really, really want it, we'll offer it. But right now, we don't believe it's the right business for us.
But just to, if you listen to an FTTH guy, they'll tell you that video is the app that consumes all the data, and the video is not well suited, certainly high resolution video for Spectrum services. How would you respond to that? And what sort of, maybe just take a step forward, what sort of daily downloads would be feasible, economically feasible on your devices?
Well, I mean, yes, I mean, our network flies. I mean, we're probably the biggest consumer by miles. So we know that the networks can handle. We know that the absolutely right video is, the hugest part of the industry. But you can't watch a movie in forward wind. So the way a movie arrives, it's X frames per second with some audio. So if you have 100 gigabit per second, your movie arrives at the same speed. And an average movie's 5 megabits per second. Maybe you want to go to 10 megabits per second. If you look in the worldwide, people kind of benchmark on 25 megabits per second. And that benchmark is purely because of shared access. But fundamentally, we see that you do need higher speed when you have more people sharing the internet. So the more people accessing it, absolutely, then you're adding up the streams in your household. But we have no issue to provide service whatsoever. I mean, our network, does gigabit per second. The network capacity can easily do multiple gigabits. But the reason that it isn't there today is not because of the things on the pole. It's actually the devices in the field. So the base stations are ahead in the technology curve, which is absolutely normal for our industry. And then the handsets and devices need to catch up. So you'll see in 5G around the world, the mobile side of 5G has got quite a big lag. And the reason is that that there's no need for you to get your WhatsApp quicker. So the actual fundamental rationale for consumers to buy 5G is still a little bit questionable on the mobile side. And a lot of telcos around the world have to launch. If their competitors launch, it's a great way to get customers. 5G is better than 4G. So you get the customers by almost, let's say, selling the sizzle, not the steak per se. But in the context of, can the networks provide service at that speed? Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. And always interesting to get the experience from the field. What is the average download per day from your unlimited devices?
Geez, I can't tell you actually. I don't actually know, but I can tell you, Kevin, it's a lot. I mean, realistically, what happens is that the network becomes like a live connection, and I think things like Office 365 and cloud storage. I mean, these things are just it's streaming data, but the amount of gigs going through it is absolutely growing. But you can't watch 3 movies at the same time. It's quite tricky. So the actual demand of consumers is pretty much, and correctly stated, is from streaming television. Is still the primary usage occasion that we see in the network. I'm still very confident that in 5G we don't have the same anxieties. And just a note, that's one of the reasons why you'll see in the telecoms industry, we've been far ahead. I mean, we launched 3 years ago, so I can tell you it's not easy. It's a complex industry. Home internet services in a wireless environment is very complicated, but the whole world's realized it works.
Great, Byron, you've had your hand up for a little while. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. It's very encouraging to hear that you're going to launch a prepaid service. It's great for the industry and for the consumer. I mean, specifically for the consumer. I mean, you've had some innovative products on the postpaid side, which found resonance with the consumer, and I'm sure you'll come up with something equally good for the consumer, right? Just the timing of it, is that related to the fact that you won the spectrum and it means more coverage and capacity, or is it more just you're at a more mature stage with your other products and so on? Just want to get a sense of that. I have a follow-up as well.
Actually, it's quite complicated to come up with innovative products all the time. But one thing I can say that our competitors have copied us, which is, I suppose, Steve Jobs says that's flattery. But they've even used our names of some of our products, which is pretty funny. So I think Sarabi from Telkom owes us a license fee. But the reality, consumers, it's a competitive landscape, and people catch up, and you have to continuously rethink it. The question is, yes, pretty much prepaid. We see 2 things. We see prepaid and then the mobile ecosystem, and we see prepaid in the home ecosystem. So we will launch a home ecosystem and a mobile ecosystem product, but the spectrum is part of that rationale. And the second thing to keep in mind is the devices that we supply to consumers, there's no cost. You can use them free of charge, what we call the home routers, or called CPEs. And putting that in the prepaid market is something that is quite complex for us to do from a commercial standpoint. So it's not a limitation from our standpoint. It's actually just getting all these kind of things to align. But when we do in let's say a home market and such like phone markets and growing into a bigger base, there obviously that makes sense. But spectrum is a key requirement. One of the things to keep in mind is, much as we're very proud that we have 70% coverage, we need to get it up, and we don't want customers to not have coverage. Our MTN and Vodacom does such an exceptional job, and sometimes being compared to them puts us under a little bit of pressure that we have to match them in coverage, and that's now what we can go do.
And just on that, the last time we chatted, you were very, I think proud is a good word. Proud of the fact that you were first to launch Mocken roaming in South Africa, and it gave a lot of capabilities to your network, right? Now with the 700 megahertz, is it a challenge to continue using Mocken on the 700, or because it's a slightly different frequency to what Vodacom radiates at? Just some thoughts on that, and obviously now this means your coverage gaps really disappear across the country. So just some thoughts on that too, please, Brandon. Thank you, and I'll go back in the queue.
Okay, no, sure. First point, Mocken roaming it's now become a name in the industry. Not only here, it's been used around the world, so maybe we should have patented it. But it's spectrum. Doesn't matter what spectrum bands you use; it makes no difference whatsoever. In terms of rollout, we do. One of the challenges as an industry is to understand where do you share infrastructure, where don't you? Where is infrastructure a competitive advantage, and where is infrastructure really a stupid thing for everyone to buy? And primarily when you see it in 5G and stuff like that, and going into the new network architectures and builds, there's definitely duplication of infrastructure. So we do see sharing, and therefore Mocken roaming, being something in the future. And in the very near future, the regulator is looking at different ways of allowing sharing, what we call spectrum sharing and spectrum pooling, and various other methodologies to do it. So you should see, and I say should, our industry is quite litigious, is that you should start seeing sharing becoming more prominent in the 5G world. And then what it does is, which makes sense, is that the networks kind of get similar enough that they compete pretty much in the market itself, rather than in the infrastructure battles that I think has been, and if you listen to the 900,000 court papers of Telkom, that's one of the things that we agreed with, is that having access to sub-1 and not having access while your competitors do does change the competitive landscape fundamentally.
So just to clarify, if you wanted to, and it made commercial sense, you would switch on 700 on mock and roaming in maybe a rural area, and that's Absolutely. Not expensive for you to do it. It's just a software upgrade, right?
Yes, it's a configuration. It's now built into the base stations, and we're really good at it. Actually, everyone's using it now. Telkom's using it, MTN's using it, Vodacom. So we all, use this architecture now.
Thanks. I'll go back in there. I've got lots of questions.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Right, I'm going to read out a question from AJ, and then we have a question from Peter. So AJ says, how are you practically able to run a 5G network on 700 megahertz, given the lower capacity throughput compared to 3,500 megahertz? Is there some sort of compression RAN technology that makes you, that enables you to push that quantum of traffic through low band? I asked Vodacom about this as well, and they were of the opinion that you can't really run 5G on sub 1 gigahertz. Well, there's throwing a challenge there.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So absolutely, yes, the capacity of 10 megahertz FDD, which is 700, is certainly not to have like super speeds on 5G. But what you do is you do layering. So what we use is 700 to get the uplink, and we use our 3.6 network to bring the downlink. And that's kind of how the telecoms industry works. It's hugely downlink centric. Even though people look at these types of meetings, it's still downlink industry. So you extend. So the way to think about it is, imagine there's again a speaker on a hill that your phone can hear the speaker, but your phone cannot speak back to that one on the hill. So that sub 1 allows us to talk back. So we actually use sub 1 to speak to our network more so than the network speaking to the device, and that extends the coverage of the network, and that's how that's why it's so important to have a balanced spectrum portfolio. You need sub 1 and you need high capacity, and logically high capacity, if you imagine it, and just use the example of a farm. It doesn't make sense to put a massive 5G base station pouring gigabits a second down to a farm where the 700 will work adequately because there's less users. So it's actually proportional as well to the number of people in that area. So hopefully that answers that. Yes, so Vodacom is correct, but it's the combination of the two. That's how it actually works.
Wonderful. Peter Takindesa, you've got a question. Please unmute and go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks, Kevin. Hi, Brendan. Great to talk again. Just the economics of roaming wholesale, of the wholesale side of your business, clearly are changing after the spectrum allocation, which means that you really need to push harder on the consumer business. If I'm getting the way I'm looking at it. So. Yeah, I don't know. How do you see those things playing out, and how long do you think your customers on the wholesale side will need to use their own spectrum and maybe reduce their? But on the other end, you continue to you will need them, right, on the access to sites. So you got a bit of a cost that's ongoing. With the revenue side, that seems to be a bit. I'm just trying to get through the economics,
sure.
And maybe just link to that, like that really means you need to push much harder on the consumer side of the business. So maybe that's one, just to hear your thinking there. It's not a very strong question, but just to get a sense of what you say. Then the second one, there's talk from ICASA about spectrum trading, and seems to be supported by the government, by the department. What does that actually mean?
Okay, well, I can answer both. And Peter, I don't think it's a trivial question. I think it's a good question. Look, telecoms is all operators have wholesale and retail divisions. Keep in mind with Vodacom is a very important customer of ours. We're not naive of that. Our contracts are long term, and many years still to go. And we've always known that there's a spectrum auction. So we've never sat here and said, let's just sit and offer our coattails and build a wholesale business. We've built a retail business with this in mind. However, we're very aware that I think from the, let's call it the investment community, you get concerns. Well, hang on, it's a very simple question. You say, well, does Vodacom need you anymore? I mean, fundamentally, yes. And that's our job as a business. We need to make sure that we can maintain our wholesale customer and make sure that they're getting the services that they want. And the simple reason why this is still the case is you have to realize that the telcos, as big as MTN and Vodacom are, they still need to support their legacy network, which is their 2G, 3G, and 4G network. And that's for many years to come, 5-10 years of installed devices. So what we sell Vodacom is effectively support for 4G, let's call it, that they can therefore complement their network architecture on 5G and such like. So we do see in the future that potentially some of the economics in the future when the contract is revisited, but we don't feel that it's a major shift. We've always known this. I mean, and keep in mind, so is Shamil. So there's no naive point from Vodacom standpoint either when entering into these agreements. We don't have a clause that says if Vodacom gets spectrum, they have the right to cancel. No, not at all. And secondly, to keep in mind, our 5G network, we built completely on our own. We don't use anybody. We build everything ourselves. So we have a lot of our own infrastructure. So, we're very aware of it. We planned for it. It's not something we planned from 5 years ago. And we're not concerned that it's going to change our economics. And we also not, in our view, we don't believe that our customer is going to leave for any reason, certainly not in the medium term. You're right. Do you have to build your consumer business stronger? Sure. And we went and bought spectrum. And this industry's got lots of moving parts. So what is there wholesale opportunities in the future? For sure. Is Vodacom one of those customers? For sure. Are there new entrants into wholesale? Absolutely. So we always have a wholesale and a retail business. We don't feel that one's completely cancels the other. To the question of spectrum trading, we also support that. We believe that spectrum is a national resource of our country, and if you're not using it, you should either sell it or give it back. The numbers that we play with in this industry are big, and therefore the amount of competitors that can really be sustained is people really committed to the industry, and therefore we support spectrum trading. And spectrum trading effectively means that you could kind of sell your spectrum to another party. But when you do that, we'll have all the same governances as per any other industry of competition law and dominance and all the other things that would happen. So if suddenly Liquid over there say, "Can I sell my spectrum to Vodacom and MTN?" they'll have some competitive problems and that's why the legislation is not trivial. It could be quite a complex, a challenge for the industry. But at ICASA, we agree. The spectrum should be liberated as best as possible. Through this, we'll grow the GDP. Through that, everyone wins.
Right. Thanks, Brenda. Just a clarification. What do you mean by saying 5G? You're rolling out your own infrastructure. Is that different from your 4G? Where are you even rolling out your own passive, or you still following the same business model as your 4G?
No, so what happens in 5G is very, very different. One of the interesting things, if you look at T-junctions industries, 5G is like the electric car versus the petrol car. It requires completely different infrastructure. 4G to 5G it's not just an upgrade path. 3G to 4G 4G to 5G is completely different. And the base stations, the antennas are what we call massive MIMO and base stations. They're all in one. The base station antenna, everything's put together. So you can't share the antenna because the base station is the antenna. So there's specifically in the high band TDD. So we've been rolling that out. We've got thousands of base stations out there. And obviously we co-locate. So if we wanted to go put our 700 network, we just put it on the same pole like MTN and Vodacom do. So I don't have new infrastructure there. I have a slightly differential in site leases in some instances, but my cables to that base station, whether it's supporting one base station, a frequency band, or two, I'll get economies of scale. So from our point of view, what we already built in the fiber, we've built fiber to every single base station. So that allows us to exploit that, let's call it that rooftop, much more cost effectively. In 4G, what happens is that in 4G, we currently have about half of our network, which is we built, and we use antennas from Vodacom, and another half or so of that network we actually RAN share. And you'll see that going forward, just like CLC is doing with MTN. It's just RAN sharing. It's a virtual base station, but you still got to build all the rest of the puzzle. And so 5G is different, completely different.
Great.
Hopefully that
Thanks,
kind of
Brandon.
answers it.
Thank
Sure.
you.
And Brandon, maybe just to if you could clarify, we understand Vodacom's about a third of your revenues at this point, right? And it's a data deal rather than any sort. So the more data they consume, the better off you'll be. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say a third. I mean, they were much higher at the beginning, and I think we don't really look at maybe it's not the right place to say that we don't look at revenue on this call, but ultimately we're looking at profitability. We focus in the profit business. We don't want to, having a huge wholesale revenue that costs us money is absolutely no point. So today that network, our 4G network, we still got a lot of scope to grow it. So the revenues are a little bit offset, but if you take revenue contribution in terms of, let's say, down to EBITDA, which is probably the easiest metric to look at, we have huge contribution now coming from our 5G business. So we are, if you take a risk profile of Rain, and you took 3 years ago, our risk profiles fundamentally changed. We do have a multi-product line, multiple technology income line. But we're still sticking to our knitting. We as much as possible. We're not naive. We're not an enterprise monster. We're not going to go do these things at this stage. We never know in the future. Perhaps we will. But I think from a revenue point of view, our revenue is still, Vodacom is a massive customer. It's enormous telco. We must never underestimate how big Vodacom is. And for us, therefore, it weights in our income statement quite a lot. But in terms of our EBITDA contribution and actually growth, our 5G is doing really, really well. And on 5G, we have no wholesale customers. So 5G is us, our network, everything of ours plumbed in, and our own revenue.
And just the other comment you made is that for all your 5G stations, you roll out your own fiber. Do you work with a third party on that, or are you actually doing the civils and the optics yourself?
We don't dig up trenches. I mean, I think I think other people are better at that than us and have better scale. So we currently use partners like DFA, and there's quite a few parties that basically rent you the plastic itself, and then we light it up. So what we call dark fiber, and we architect that network to be 100 gigabits per second. It's huge capacity in our backhaul. Look, by the same token, if we felt that, and this is quite interesting about our industry, as much as you can buy wholesale, there's also a point in time that your economics must make sense. So if it's cheaper for me to trench the road, then we must trench it. It's not a huge technology leap to get a ditch witch and dig a trench along a road. So it's purely what is good about these types of things. They're very commercially sane. It's rent or own infrastructure. So we're very pleased that we're very happy with our partner DFA, and that they're growing, we're growing. So everyone's quite going to commercially quite sane there at the moment.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that. Paul, you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute and go ahead?
Yes. Hi, Brandon. A couple of questions. I mean, do you disclose how many 5G customers you have? And how are you solving the distribution conundrum? Because, I mean, that was always a tough one. And in terms of that EBITDA, I mean, your shareholders kind of intimated that the 5G business had just broken even, but you sort of intimating that you EBITDA margin positive. So I just want to clarify that. And I guess, are you potentially, as you move further into creating the 5G network and stuff, are you not then just becoming the third player in the market? I mean, was it not always better to on-sell the spectrum that you bought on the cheap to the bigger players? I mean, if you're getting it at a 50% discount, can't you do the same data deals that you've always done with the bigger players and not spend an ounce of capex and just, generate the returns of those agreements rather? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the simple thing there, and let's just try and answer the last question first, is, the yield you can get out of spectrum is much higher than I can lease it for. Okay, let's put it that way. We're not in the business of going to the government, getting spectrum and giving it to someone else. That's not our business, and we're not going to do that. We remember, network is the combination. It's the spectrum, the base stations, the whole thing that creates, let's say, this capacity. And that's the leverage that telcos have. I mean, that's why MTN and Vodacom, look at their margins. They're high because you can leverage this. So what we do is, if we are going to sell any wholesale capacity to anybody, we'll sell wholesale capacity, not spectrum. So spectrum plus base stations is much higher yield than spectrum on its own. And you have to and the simple reason why you have to really understand it. So we believe we add a lot of intellectual property to building these things, and we add, it's money. You're investing money in base stations. So if you did the Cedric box calc and you say how much, let's say spectrum's 100 rand, I get a yield of X percent. Let's say 10%, I can get 50 or 100% on the network. And that's pretty much all telcos do that around the world. To try and answer the other questions, no, we don't release any of our numbers. And let me just tell everybody why. It's not that we try to be secretive. It's that we are a little bit, I suppose. It's a bit of a competitive advantage. If the shop next door tells you that they're all selling, pizzas, then the next restaurant also sells pizzas. But I think people are not naive that we're doing well in our 5G business. Distribution today, we still do it online. We deliver through couriers. And I think that's been one of the benefits that we've had through lockdown, all these things. People got so used to it, and the courier industry has got really, really good. People delivering food in 24 hours or a couple of hours is incredible. So we're leveraging, let's call it, the internet market in that sense. And the other thing just to keep in mind is, our industry itself in the home market, let's say simplistically, it's a very low penetrated internet penetration country, South Africa. It's got huge growth, and we can't do it ourselves. We're not nervous of MTN arriving or FTTH. The market's massive, and we're growing within that market. So the challenge, what happens, and I think in the telecom sector to date, they've always measured subscriber volume. We, bluntly honest, we don't care about subscriber volume. We look at profitability. Getting customers on our network and getting the revenue, and that costs us money. Why we want to do that? So when people will ask us investor questions about how many customers, one of the things we're nervous of is saying, if I've got 100 customers, and let's use, unfortunately for Doug Cell-C, I've got 1 million customers, and who's more profitable? We're trying to do that. From an EBITDA margin point of view, yes, we are EBITDA positive on a monthly basis on our business, and we've been so for quite a while. We've hit all our targets that we've put down. We've got some ambitious targets, as always. I don't know, as someone said, there's not a single spreadsheet any investor's ever seen that doesn't have a hockey stick. And unfortunately, damn it, so does ours. So we've got a lot of work to deliver on it. But, we think our fundamentals are still there. We want the right customers that allow us to be profitable.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Myron, you still have a question?
Yeah, thanks. Just squaring the circle on Peter's question. From what I understand from our chats before and speaking to Vodacom, there's sort of a fixed element and a variable element to the roaming agreement, right? I don't think anyone's saying, Vodacom can cancel the contract. It's just they can cut back a lot if they switch on their own spectrum, right? And we've seen that sort of, even though you don't disclose revenue numbers, you could sort of get a sense of your revenue growth from Vodacom. So, as it can grow, it can go down as well. I mean, or am I just being thick here? It's possible I'm being thick, but that's not uncommon.
No, I mean, I think you try to extrapolate something. Look, the sensitivity to our variable income from Vodacom is time. It's very small. So, it's most of our revenue is fixed. I mean, that's how our industry works. If you look at telecom roaming on Vodacom or MTN, it's massive minimum commits, we call them. And, guarantee me 100 rand, and you can use 1 gig, So in effect, Vodacom's got an enormous prepaid bundle from us. And whether they use them or not, they still pay. And we buy infrastructure for them. So theoretically, if we don't use it, we still pay. So that's one of the challenges of our industry. It's got a large fixed cost component to it. But that's the benefit of it. That's why I come back to the leverage that kicks in.
And I'm conscious of time. And you talked about, the distribution conundrum, Paul's question, if I remember. And you talked about online and through couriers. I mean, that sort of makes sense on the postpaid side, where, ARPUs are quite high. On the prepaid, I mean, the economics don't make sense, right? I mean, how do you get the SIM into the person's hand? I mean, are we going back to the, the Pick and Pay, the Edgar's, whoever's left kind of model, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, the two things there. The one is, you're right. The prepaid market to distribute a low ARPU SIM through a courier is economically not rational. However, the one good thing is that the distribution networks exist. It's not like I have to invent it. So if we want to drop a SIM card into PEP and Pick and Pay and all that, it's just a commercial transaction. There's no real technical barrier to entry there. It's purely a commercial sanity. And that's why, again, we really stay focused on customer lifetime value. We have no interest to drop a SIM into someone's hand that's going to give us 10 rand. That we're not good at that. So we're not naive that, look, Vodacom, MTN, and Telkom and Cell C all there, and we want to just carve out a decent market for ourselves. But we would be naive to say that we can handle 100 million SIMs going through our network at 10 rand. That's not a business case that we geared for. And look, the future we never know. But from our point of view, distribution exists. You just don't want to give the retailers any margin. That's what it boils down to.
Thanks very much. And you mentioned you're going to have a beer in the mornings. It's so busy.
Yeah.
When you decide to do that, just call me. I'm keen to have a beer, right? with you.
Sure. The one thing we have here at Trade is you have a lot of celebrations because we've had a lot of fights. I think we've had so many court cases, but it's industry. So yeah, we're very, very busy. So there's so many handles in an industry, and I apologize for everyone on the call. Our industry is complex. It might look simple because you use the product and service, but buying getting in a plane and flying it, being a passenger is very different than being an airline. And for us as telcos, it's a complex industry, lots of variables, which to me, yes, it makes us not sleep, but what it gives us opportunity to leverage these variables to our best advantages.
And your last question from my side, if we have a look at your progress over the last few years, you've secured the spectrum, you've built out a 7,500 network environment. In terms of hockey sticks, so you're getting to the point now where you talk about being EBITDA positive, where the free cash flow should start to improve going forward, and in terms of capital requirements, how do you think about that? And would there ever be any benefit to you being a public company?
Well, I don't think with me here, that's for sure. I think public companies is too much effort. No, I think the reality is we're very fortunate. I mean, our chairman Paul, and we've got enough bankers on our board, so that we understand capital very, very, very well. We're very well. Our balance sheet's healthy. We've got enough headroom for our network plans. We have sensitivity analysis coming out of our ears. If it's like presenting a credit committee every board meeting. So, having that many founders of banks on our board, I think you have a lot of financial prudence. But at this stage, capital, we've been very, very fortunate that our existing shareholders have been able to facilitate capital requirements. But yes, we do generate cash flows now, so we are creating our own, capital to invest. And we will still always be prudent in how we manage cash flow. We're obsessed with it, and comes back to why we want profitable customers, not lots of customers. And a challenge for us as an industry is, how do you grow beyond your, these kind of closed parameters? So maybe to kind of look at this hockey stick, Kevin, that I keep saying is in everyone's model. Homes, very simplistically, I think anyone in the home market's going to have growth. We just like to get a disproportionate amount of growth, and we hope to do that by leveraging our infrastructure that we've deployed. In the mobile market, the difference here, you actually have to take it from competitors. It's extremely well serviced industry. We're not naive of that, so we're quite prudent on that. But for us, we bought spectrum. We have a network. Mobility and voice and all these other things are pretty much an application of our network. So in a sense, they're new revenue lines, not really new cost lines. And that's where some potential lies for us. And we trying to win on the the Sunshine Tour before we enter the PGA Tour. You know, we got a cool team of people. We're growing all the time. It is quite amazing how much our team has grown, but our challenges are not trivial. We completely understand we're going to have competitive headwind. We completely understand that we're going to have economic headwinds, but we're going to give it a shot. You know, we didn't, as to the earlier question, we didn't acquire the spectrum or build this business to lease out spectrum. You know, that's not what we're doing. You know, we'd like to build a business that I think Vodacom, MTN are proper competitors, and Telkom and Cell C, you know, that's probably where we're going to go. I mean, it's completely rational. Customers are much more price sensitive there. And that's probably where we'll go. I mean, but this industry's got lots of growth in it. There's so many applications. We think about mobility. Just go back and think before you had a phone, you know. So 4IR, and no one knows this killer app of IoT yet. So if anyone on the call knows it, please WhatsApp me. I'd really appreciate it. But there's lots of other revenues lines coming.
Fantastic, Brandon. A great hour with you. Thank you for your insights and sharing your experiences in this industry, and all the best in the year ahead.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the questions, as always. Much appreciated. And let's hopefully one day we can do this in person, and we can have that beer, but then it might not be in the morning. We'll host you guys.
Excellent. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.